5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You're listening to the GHT Overland podcast. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us on the GHT Overland podcast.
This is where you get the greatest interviews and insights from overland travelers around the globe. You will learn the basics to the advanced in overlanding, so buckle up and get ready for more adventure. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lisa. This is part 2 with Steve and Julie of Venturesome Overland. Last week we learned about Toto, their Land Rover Defender 110. Listen to a dream story of theirs in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, some great tips on getting fresh produce from local markets, and a lot more.
This week we pick up as Steve was walking us through their tips on border crossings with a little bit of a snag they ran into with their vehicle still showing it was registered under the previous owner as they were trying to cross from Tanzania into Malawi.
Get ready for more stories from the road, in-depth details from their years of overlanding experience, along with a very important topic of finances for a long-term overland trip.
I am super stoked to get into the details on finances for the first time and more epic stories from Africa. Lisa?
Let's do it.
Our last trip, we only had one border that was even remotely sort of difficult.
In Malawi.
This was the crossing from Tanzania to Malawi, and that was a problem that it was not even of our making.
It wasn't. Yeah. They had the car registered in the previous owner's name. It's because they had driven up through.
Yeah, so
Malawi,
the previous owners of the car had driven the car to Malawi, and when it came up in the customs system, it still had his name attached to it instead of mine. So they had a hard time figuring that out, but it was.
They figured it out.
It was a computer problem.
Yeah.
It was a computer glitch, basically. Once they got over the computer glitch, everything was fine. And, we found the borders were the least likely place where you were going to get shaken down for a bribe or where you were going to be, detained arbitrarily, almost to a number. We crossed 8 borders on this trip.
We crossed 15 borders. We never had a problem.
We never had an immigration officer look even twice at us.
We never had anyone ask us for a bribe.
Nope.
It's a bureaucracy.
That's great.
And those bureaucracies are getting better in Africa. They're getting more streamlined. They're getting more computerized. I would argue that it's getting easier. Always, as like many of your guests have said, you want to be prepared. You want to have multiple copies of your documents that are certified. You want to have your house in order in that sense. But
you should know where you've come from, where you're going, how long you estimate staying. One of the things that Steve does that I think is really useful, just from a physical perspective, is we have a big blue binder, just a plastic binder, and we keep all of our documents in there. And nobody knows what's in it, but it looks like we know what we're doing. Because the one thing you will get at borders in Africa, almost all of the borders that we crossed were runners. Here, let me help you through the immigration process. Let me show you where to go. Let me take your documents, and it's no, dude, we're not gonna, there's 2 windows we need to go to. We know what we're doing. You do not need a runner. You don't need a fixer at any of these borders. And we saw a lot of people sort of falling in with that. Just say, know what you're doing, say no thanks. I know what I'm supposed to do, and just walk yourself through it. You'll get lost. You'll show up at the wrong window, and somebody official will tell you where to go. You do not need somebody to guard your car, and that happens. We would park Toto and somebody would be like, okay, I'll stay here and watch the car. And we'd be like, yeah, whatever. And then we would come back out through the process, pick up the car again, and they'd be like, okay, so I watched your car for you. We're like, yeah, but there's like, your army is like sitting right here. Like the police are sitting here. Like we don't need you to watch the car. So you just have to be aware.
Yeah. And I think, part of that is like this sort of like projecting that confidence, even if you don't have it.
Exactly.
even if you think, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have a big bundle of official looking documents under my arm and I am walking purposefully into this building and I'm going to act like I know what I'm doing, even if I don't. And every sort of actual sort of uniformed official that we interacted with, over the course of 35 travel days or however long it was extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And even if we had a question or we showed up at the wrong window, sorry, sir, you're at the customs window. You need to go to immigration first. Okay.
And, the thing is, like, I would say, because you do see this sometimes at borders, like, don't to, right? Like these are service people, right? Like, and I speak from someone who, as a public librarian, a former public librarian, like if you're in a service profession, like don't jump down the throat of the guy across the desk, right? Like you are a visitor in someone's country. You are not entitled to like cut the line or like get any special treatment. Like just be a person, Yeah,
that's a lot of really good advice. Thank you for going through that. Any specific safety planning that you do or tips you can provide our listeners on safety and security?
We don't, we separate the money out in different places. Obviously we keep the car locked at all times. Like you just totally get in that habit. There's nothing, we didn't really do anything. Keep your passports are gold. Like that's the most important thing you're carrying. So keep them safe somewhere.
And for us, that big blue binder we talked about that we used at border posts, that sort of was the nexus for where we kept our most important documents. But if we felt like we were in situations where maybe the security of the car was a little bit iffy, we would separate those things out, so they weren't all in one place, right? But you just having that sort of self-awareness in terms of what is this situation? Do we feel comfortable here? You're listening to that little bit of an inner voice, and thinking about, do I need to take an extra step to keep things secure and to keep myself secure?
And we do have a word, like we've got our word, like that, that we say, like if there's, if one of us feels like super uncomfortable. But I have to say, and I really do feel like it's important to say, because we're living and have traveled through Africa, we never have felt unsafe. We really haven't. I think there's a perception that it's really dangerous to cross some of these borders, that it can be really scary to be here, and it's not at all.
I mean, there are places where there's like political instability and violence and stuff, and obviously, I mean, that kind of thing will be in the news. It will be obvious. We avoided one border for that exact reason on our most recent journey, but. Keeping track of what folks are saying who are on the road. And, for us, in particularly, I think in African travel, the Facebook pages have been really good. The ones that are associated with Overland Sphere, Overlanding Africa page, we've met a lot of people on the page. We were traveling simultaneously through similar landscapes and similar countries. And, everybody knows like sort of where they're at and what's going on, and you get that up-to-date information. And, there's pretty good cell phone service across most of Eastern and Southern Africa. So you can always get on the Facebook page and, and see what's going on if you're lacking information. And that, the security situation is tied to information. The more information you have, the more secure you're going to be.
Okay.
And how do you manage changing currency as you travel into and out of different countries?
We generally would go to banks. I'm not a huge fan of changing money at the border. It can be chaotic. And if you don't know the exchange rate you're supposed to be getting, you're going to lose money. So I don't think we ever found a place where there was not an ATM, or a bank. So we would just go and get money that way. And we tried to be careful about like using down what we had, before we crossed a border.
Yeah. And I feel like we got caught a couple of times with that question. So say, for example, we were crossing from Uganda to Tanzania, and sometimes there are these little sort of border fees, and you'll find this periodically in Africa where you have to pay a very small fee to the local community that allows you to go through the border post. And they call it a council levy. And the idea is like a little bit of a tax that benefits the community at the border. And we had spent all of our money buying Cokes or something, and we didn't realize that there was going to be a little tax right before the border. And it was something very minimal. It was like $1 US, right? And we didn't have any local currency anymore because we had spent it all. So, that helps in terms of that like border, research question. Make sure you hang on to, 30 kwacha because you're going to need it to pay the council levy. But otherwise, yeah, we really tried to just stick with ATMs. Cash is king in Africa. I think debit cards and credit cards are becoming more widely accepted,
and honestly, US dollars
always. So we always kept a stash of US dollars, and
they're taken everywhere.
In a real emergency, they talk. And also for some things, like say for example visas, like if you're paying for a visa on arrival at an immigration post, especially overland, they want US dollars for those visas. They'll take local currency, but sometimes there's a little bit of negotiation. They prefer to see some nice crisp Benjamins for those visas, and so we carried those for that purpose. But we also kept some just for those instances when you needed it. But we didn't really need that too often. It was more ATMs than anything, and they're everywhere. And it's usually pretty easy.
Primarily Benjamins, or what denominations would you normally keep with you?
20s are good. 20s you can usually,
Okay.
I recommend that.
Yeah, like a lot of the some of the visas, like an American visa, in say like a single entry visa to Kenya for an American is $50 per person. So it was easy to just have a $100 bill for two people, and it was done. But the 20s are easier to change for people if you're using them kind of on the street, that kind of thing.
And definitely at the borders here, I think someone has mentioned this on your show before, like pay attention, because sometimes it matters like what year your currency is from, right? So just do your homework.
Yep.
And a lot of the information's out there. It's, and like I said, the borders are getting more professional and more standardized. And I think the information is out there, and it won't change very much.
So let's dive deeper on finances. One of the most common questions asked is, how can you afford to do what you're doing? Or I'm sure you've gotten the famous, you must have won the lottery, or you're rich. Obviously, the real question is, how can they do what you're doing? How can our listeners mimic what you've done so they can do something more than a weekend or a week's vacation overland trip, especially in Africa? So if you would, give us your best insights on financing an overland trip like yours, along with any savings tips and budgeting during your overlanding, to help our listeners with some solid ideas to take action on immediately, as well as any tips on working remotely as an overlander or ways our listeners can earn money while overlanding.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the question we ask ourselves all the time also. I mean, obviously, I'm a librarian. Steve's a freelancer right now. We're not exactly rolling in it. And we were on the road for 5 weeks, but I don't know if I would call it long term. But the things that have worked for us have been fairly straightforward. I mean, they're not sexy at all, right? Like we paid off our debt. Like that was a priority for me. So I would just put, I would pay the debt first every month, student loans, things like that. And then everything else was just what we had to live on. It's really, really helpful to use cash in your day-to-day life. So actually, we're talking about cash on the road, but one of the things that we did when we came here to Botswana was make a monthly budget and take out that monthly budget in cash. And that's what we have to spend. That's it. And so we you're a lot more cognizant of what you're spending when you actually have to open your wallet and pull out bills instead of a debit card or a credit card. So we try really hard to pay cash for everything and to keep it within our budget. We've gotten really good at living small. Botswana has been good for that. Like we were saying, we came with 2 suitcases each, and it's amazing how fast you realize how much stuff you don't need. So, we didn't sell a lot when we left, but as soon as we get home, like if we're going to just go through our house as soon as we get home. If we don't sell a half to 2/3 of what we own, I'm going to be super bummed, right? So selling stuff, obviously, we buy all of our clothes used. We eat pretty simple, right? Like we don't go out to eat a lot. We do a lot of macaroni, a lot of beans and rice. If we do go out to eat, we'll split a pizza, and that's our thing. I would say on the road, obviously shopping local, like I was saying, you can get a lot for very little. Eat your own food, which is why we were talking about that egg sandwich, right? Because sometimes you're just so tired at the end of the day. It's just easier to like go over to the bar and order something, and you can blow your money that way, right? So if you have like that egg sandwich where you're like, you know what, this is not going to cost me anything. It's going to take a few minutes to make. So do that. We would negotiate sometimes with the camping. So I would go in and say like, how much for a night? And they would give me a price, and I would say, well, could we stay 2 nights for, 1.5? So sometimes you can negotiate camping on the road. And then a big thing for us, honestly, is just prioritizing. Like it's really important for us to get into the Kalahari, for example. And so we skipped the national parks in East Africa because they were a lot of money. And we said, okay, here's our budget. If we spend this money in East Africa, we're not going to be able to spend it later down the road. So you really have to have intentional conversations about what is it that we want to do, and how are we going to do it. One thing we did learn on this trip with finances is that we need to open an account just to fund the truck. So I would recommend this to overlanders. Like when we get home, I'm going to open just a small savings account where every month we put away some money for Toto, because we did break a coil spring on this trip, and we were lucky we were able to get it fixed. We didn't lose too much time. We lost a few days in Malawi, but it was expensive, right? So the parts were expensive, and the labor was fairly expensive, and so it blew a hole in what I thought we had. So we're going to open a fund for the truck so that when those things happen down the road, it doesn't screw up our regular budget.
Yeah, it's smart.
And then the other thing I would say is to be tough, right? Like this 2-burner stove that we have is actually only 1 burner. Like one of them doesn't work, right? And the knobs are kind of, they're kind of bad. They fall off a lot. And so we would go back and forth, like, should we stop in a city and get a new stove? And finally I was just like, if we can buy the stove that we are going to keep in this truck for years, then yes. But if we're not, then no. Like we'll muddle through with this 1-burner, 2-burner stove. So sometimes you just have to say like, you're not out there to have instant convenience all the time. So those are prioritizing, like I said, I had that like breakthrough moment in the Kalahari a few years ago, and it's really useful when you start thinking about your money in a different way, right? We hang in our bedroom a big map of the world. I look at it every morning and I'm like, well, like we could go out to eat something fancy, or we could save $100 and get a visa to go into Kenya, so you start thinking about what your money will get you in different ways. So I don't know if that's helpful for any of your listeners, but that's what's worked for us so far.
So I know everybody has different amounts of debt that they have and want to get paid off. Curious, the amount that you had, how long did it take you to pay that off to then venture and do your overlanding?
That's a really good question. I've had student loans forever. I just managed to get those paid off last year. So I graduated in 2000. So that'll give you a sense of how long that took. We had some other debt that I just like, I just made it a priority. Like I was so tired of living under that debt. I was like, you know what? Like any extra money we made went straight into that because I couldn't, yeah. So it took us, I would say, 20 years for the student loan, maybe 2 years for some of the other debt. But when I say that like we put a lot of money into this, it was like when we stopped paying the debt, it was like having another paycheck. That's how much money I was putting towards getting those bills down. So it was a lot.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. Any tips you guys have on working remotely as overlanders, or ways our listeners can think about earning money while they're overlanding?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I'll just be like totally upfront. We were talking to some friends of ours who are in the process of moving overseas, and they actually had a very similar question. And one of the challenges for me, I think, especially because we're based in Botswana, we're traveling around Africa, over the last 2 years, but we're based in Botswana, and while Julie has her home base at the university, I don't have a work permit in Botswana, and so I've been sort of trying to do remote work and other kinds of things, and it's to be honest, it's been a struggle. It's not easy, and I think maybe part of the advice that I would say is, I think there's a sort of a little bit of an industry that sort of kind of romanticizes that remote work question. Live on a beach in Thailand and have all kinds of contracts and so on and so forth. And I think my advice would be just be prepared to do a lot more work and have a lot less work than you might imagine, because it's not quite as simple as it seems. And you have to kind of build those networks and build those relationships and build that career over quite a long time. It's not going to happen instantly. So, my advice would be, don't just drop everything and hit the road and expect you're going to have this like amazing, remote work career like right away. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of relationship building, stuff that you would do at a regular job in a regular place, not necessarily in a remote one. So, I think that would be my advice on that.
It seems to be a lot harder than I think it comes across. Yeah. We both freelance, and so we both get small little paychecks here and there. And again, I think part of it is just being really intentional, right? Like, so you make $200 on a magazine article or something, and it's like, you can blow that really fast, or you can put it away towards, a campsite somewhere.
How about a stove?
Or a stove.
That's great. So, gratitude. Thank you so much for going into those details. We really appreciate it. So navigation and communication. Tell us real quick about your communication tips, like cell phones, SIM cards. What would be most helpful for people going into a trip and making sure that they've got that security blanket, if you will, staying connected?
Sure. So we traveled pretty extensively over the last year and a half, and then also over the intensively over the last couple of weeks, a few weeks in East and Southern Africa. At least in that context, I'll just be really specific. There's a lot of cell phone coverage. It was LTE from one end to the other in Ethiopia, with almost no gaps. Regular cell phone service is very, very easy to find in most parts of this part of the world. So SIM cards are cheap, they're easy to get, and data is also very inexpensive. So $5 for 2 gigabytes, right? And that'll last you, as long as it'll last you.
Save your SIM cards too, right? Like sometimes, like crossing the borders, you can trade SIM cards with somebody who's going the opposite direction as you are. If you're not ever going to go back to, wherever, and they're headed that way, give them your SIM card.
Yeah. So we swapped SIM cards with some folks who were going north, and we were going south into Malawi. They were going to Tanzania, and we just traded. And it was super easy, right? And we ended up with quite a bit of data on that one. Navigation wise, I think a lot of your other guests have covered this pretty extensively, but we used a combination of Maps.me, Google Maps, Tracks for Africa, and another app called OSM and Maps. I think overall the most useful is Maps.me, without question, at least in this part of the world. So Tracks for Africa is sort of the vaunted app, but its usefulness diminishes as you go north from southern Africa. So, once you get out of Zambia, once you get to Malawi, it starts to, because it's sort of half crowdsourced, there's not quite as much information. And we found the user interface on iOS, because we mostly use our phones as navigation devices, quite cumbersome. The user interface is better on a Garmin for Tracks for Africa. It's not super useful or very easy to operate on an iPhone. So we probably used Tracks for Africa the least on this trip. We used Maps.me the most, and then supplemented it because it's not always accurate, right? So cross-checking with like different, navigation apps is really the way to go, especially if things start to look a little weird, like, this doesn't seem to be taking me in the right direction. Just popping into the other app and cross-checking really helped us out quite a few times.
And an iOverlander, of course.
And then, of course, yeah. iOverlander got us, all over the place for sure. Yeah.
Do you guys use InReach or Spot for emergency communication if needed?
We have a Spot. We haven't had to use it, so.
Yeah, we bought a Gen 3. That's all that was available in Botswana. We didn't use it. Yeah,
you just keep it packed away just in case.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go through some onboard necessities real quick. How much fuel can you carry, and how far does that take you? Any tips on calculating fuel needs?
Yeah, so the Land Rover just currently has its stock fuel tank, carries 80 liters. But I think I mentioned this earlier that the fuel efficiency is quite remarkable. So we, did a lot of just paper math with, the trip odometer, and we carried an extra jerry can, just one. Again, as Eastern and Southern Africa modernizes, there's fuel everywhere, and it's very easy to find in pretty much every community. So yeah, we didn't spend a lot of time worrying about fuel range.
We could go pretty far on a tank of gas.
Yeah, I would say 400 miles. Yeah.
Okay. And then how much water do you carry, and any tips you've got on water purification?
We have a 55-liter water tank, and the previous owners installed a 2-stage filtration system, so they were able to sort of fill up that tank pretty much anywhere. And it was a full ceramic filtration system, and with a little tap that came out the back, so almost like a kitchen tap. So we were able to get filtered water pretty much everywhere. And 55 liters last us about 5 days, generally, in terms of usage.
Okay. And do you guys use solar or a generator at all?
We have an 80-watt solar panel on the roof, and it keeps the battery topped up pretty much all the time.
Solar's great.
Yeah, really basic solar charge controller. It'll run from the engine as well, but pretty much kept it on solar all the time because it's sunny constantly in Africa. So, and yeah, it was. And like I said before, the Snowmaster really has a very low draw, and so. Yeah, we even on days when we weren't driving, many days in a row, we had no problem with power.
Okay. One of the questions that we got last year is, how do you select a refrigerator? So I know that the refrigerator came with Toto, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Oh, no.
However, any tips that you've got with your experience in picking out a refrigerator, from the amp draw to reliability, anything that you can help us out with there?
Yeah, I think, I think the most important thing seems to me to be that sort of plug it in and forget it situation, right? Like you want it to just run, and not have to worry about it. And I think in terms of like fridge selection, I find I did a lot of research on this because we were looking to buy a fridge for our other vehicle, which we didn't do, but I think the technology has gotten so good now, and most of the brands are so close to one another. National Lunar, Snowmaster, ARB, whatever, right? Like they're in terms of performance, they're all like right in line with one another, and so that it seems like that peace of mind just sort of comes with the territory if you spend the money for a good fridge. If I had any advice to the fridge, it's strap it down. You don't want that thing moving around in the back of the car, because it seems pretty beefy, but it has some fragile internal components, and whatever fridge you get, you just want to make sure that it's in place and it's not moving around and it's not banging against other things. So, take care of it. It's an expensive investment.
Yeah. So road stories are always a favorite. What's a favorite road story that maybe you were in a situation and you were nervous about? Or I also read, what was the flower story that you guys had?
Yeah, that was a great one.
That's what I was thinking of.
Oh, was it the one you were thinking of?
Yeah.
One of the things that we inherited with Toto is a 10-year-old sourdough starter from Austria that the previous drivers had inherited from someone else. And so when we got the car, they gave us a scoop of this starter. And so we were traveling with it, and we needed to feed it. We could not find flour anywhere, just plain old wheat flour. We would stop in all these places and ask, and no luck. And I thought, this thing is going to die on us. We're going to kill this 10-year-old starter. And we were in a campsite in Ethiopia, and they were super helpful. We were the only people there. It was a new lodge kind of starting up. There's nobody in any of the rooms, nothing. And so we asked the manager, like, hey, do you have some flour? In Ethiopia, they use a lot of teff flour, not wheat. So I was really specific, like, we need wheat flour, no teff, no maize. And he's like, yeah, we got it. We can do that. And we're like, yay, thank you. So he sent his guys out to go get this flour, and we sat down to wait. And they came in about 5 minutes later with their arms loaded. I mean, loaded with flowers from a bush outside somewhere.
Various wildflowers.
Like these amazing yellow and purple flowers that were just like, and they were so happy. Like they were the smiles on these guys' faces. And we just looked at each other and burst out laughing. And we're like, this is perfect. This is just what we needed. Thank you so much. Like they must think we're on our honeymoon or something, because we were just laughing like so hard, and they were so pleased. So it was one of those perfect moments.
I'm a girl likes flowers.
And that's the thing. Like it was just like those crazy moments of connection that you have. And they brightened up the campsite. It was great.
Did you ever get the wheat flour?
We got the wheat flour in Kenya. Yeah. We found it.
Oh, yeah, like the next day.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. Bread lives.
And that's the thing. I mean, you'll find that, things you think might be a staple, you might not find in certain places. But
people are so kind.
Yeah.
Like people just,
we found that over and over. And that was sort of the best.
Connections.
That was the best story.
Yeah.
But, we had people doing similar things for us, throughout the whole trip.
That's great. So any helping others, doing good philanthropy that you focus on while you're overlanding?
For us, that has boiled down to shopping local in markets, staying in places that are locally owned or that in some way contribute back to the community. I have some real mixed feelings about sort of volunteering in Africa in general, just because sometimes I think people come and they do what's going to make them feel good and not necessarily what a community needs. And so we try to operate within the space that we are in, which is other people's space, right? Like we're here in someone else's country. We want to support local economies as much as possible. Like someone told us this great story about, you can think that you're doing something really good and really harmless, but that it can have ripple effects that you don't expect. So someone was telling us the story about how he had a friend who was traveling and was giving out pencils to kids in villages, right?
And gave a large donation to a school.
Gave a donation to a school for pencils and things like that. And then got called into the village after and told by the headman of the village that he had basically like thrown a big wrench in the local economy because there is a guy in the village who sells school supplies. And so his economy, his business took a real hit that month because you come in thinking, oh, it's harmless to like bring a bunch of pencils to a school. So I would just say to people who are thinking of doing that to ask what people need before you assume what they need, right? And ask what they need instead of what you think is going to make you feel good. So, and it's really like, I have some pretty strong feelings about it, especially in this context, because there's just such a long history of people trying to do good and just not, so you really have to weigh intent with impact.
And part of this is doing your homework, right? I mean, getting the information and in some ways it's an issue of being there.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes it's hard to tell from a long ways away.
But you can do some work. Like in Malawi, we camped one night at what's basically like a daycare, like an orphanage. And we chose that place specifically because 98% of the camping fees go directly into the local community. And so we could have gotten further down the road that day. We could have stayed somewhere else, but we were like, no, we're going to stop here because this is going to do some good without making too much harm.
And that community had already established that that's what they had wanted for their community. And so it was a way to say, okay, yeah, you know what? We'll support that. And we add a little bit of extra cash on top of the camping fee. And that's a way to do that, I think, that's really conscious of those communities. Yeah.
And I really do. I think you hear things here that you don't maybe hear in other places. Like we heard the story of one of these borders where people will, kids will surround you and approach your car and ask for money, straight out. Right. And there have been cases where people have rolled down their windows and thrown candy out the windows at kids to get them away from the car. And it's that's just so wrong on so many levels, right? So you don't be that person.
Yeah, you're not at a parade.
Exactly, right? Totally.
Yeah. Now, Julie, you had mentioned a little bit ago, which I thought was pretty interesting, when you're buying fruits, vegetables on the side of the road, that you would do that, especially with women selling that. Is there something to learn there? Is there a difference with the women that are selling local produce?
I think I love interacting with local women. So part of it, that is just for me. But, women are the ones who take care of their families all over the world. And so my philosophy is that, if I can buy my eggs from a woman and I see her with her kids around her, she's going to spend that money reinvesting in her business or, getting her kid a school uniform or things like that. They're assumptions, but I definitely feel more comfortable buying from women just in general because I like interacting with them, but also because they rule the roost, right? They hold things together. We try specifically to focus on women because when you can uplift women, they can uplift their families, and then that uplifts the community.
Got it. Love it. That's really good. Awesome. So this has been a lot of fun. Anything that we've missed?
I don't think so. You guys have covered a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up with some fun facts about you. What keeps your co-driver occupied on long drives?
My brain. It's a pretty interesting place in there. It's never quiet, so I pretty much.
I can relate to that. I'm with you.
My brain is always spinning. We do talk a lot, in some ways, this is a really natural lifestyle for us. When we were in college, Steve had an old Volkswagen and we went to school in Montana. So you could just drive and gas was cheap and we would drive for hours and days, actually, sometimes. And so we kind of got to know each other in the car. And so this is just very natural. So sometimes in some ways, it brings me back to the early days of our relationship because we'll have these just really deep conversations where it's we're getting to know each other all over again. At least that's how it feels from the passenger seat. I also do I marvel at his driving. He seriously, it does not matter what city you put him in. It's he was born there and I do not have that skill. So. Do
you play any musical instruments on the road or around the campfire at night?
No.
No, we're hopeless.
What's your favorite drink in the morning to get you going?
Coffee, for sure. Like sometimes I'm super
Amen.
excited to go to bed at night just because I know I can have coffee in the morning.
Where's a good place to get coffee? Like, have you found a favorite place?
The coffee in Ethiopia was unbelievable.
Outstanding.
Like, it was so good.
Outstanding.
So good.
And we felt like coffee smugglers on this last trip because we drove through all these, like, coffee countries, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and just Rwanda. Like every country we went to, we would just buy bags and bags of coffee. We had one entire suitcase, just one box, full of just coffee.
Ethiopia takes the cake.
I think so.
Hands down.
I think so. Yeah. And it's a coffee culture, right? Yeah.
And what's a favorite beverage at night to wind down after a long day on the road?
I'll take a gin and tonic if I can get it.
Yeah, we were laughing about that actually because I think some of your other guests, I think Bag of Broads and stuff, we're talking about these G&Ts you can get in a can.
We were like, what is that magic? We did not. I've never heard of that. So if we make it to South America, we're going to look for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we thought
those girls knew what they were doing.
We should just call this the G&T podcast now. We just
Great.
But
What is your best advice to aspiring overlanders like us?
Oh, wow. I would say it's not backpacking. So be comfortable, right? It's like you're not out there to show how tough you are. So I do not like being in a sleeping bag. And so we literally in our tent bring basically our entire bed. Like we bring the big down blanket from the bed and our real pillows. And it's a way to be comfortable at the end of the day. Like you're not out there to suffer. And it does take up space, but it's something that's important. So focus on those things that are important. And I would also say to your guy listeners out there, from a woman's perspective, I hear a lot. Guys will say I wish my girlfriend did this, or this is way outside of, what I could do with my family. And then I ask them well, how do you know? Did you ever actually ask? And most of them haven't. And so I would say if this is something you want to do, start easy and slow. If you want your partner to do it with you, go on a simple trip, right? And be comfortable and cook some good comfort food and don't make it a trek, The other thing that I would say, I love Instagram. I love taking photos, but I would say to new overlanders, be really wary of the Instagramification of overlanding, right?
New word.
It's a new word. But sometimes I look at people's pictures and I'm like, who are these people? They're clean, they're happy, they don't look like they're overlanding.
White
you're
clothes
dirty
on.
and you're tired and sometimes you can get so caught up
you're
in
being eaten by insects.
Seriously, and you're so caught up waiting for that perfect photographic moment that you forget what it is you're doing. So just be careful. Have your own experience. You do not have to have everybody else's experience.
Love it. Absolutely great.
That's really.
I don't know. You want to add anything?
Yeah, that's really good. I think the only thing I would add is sometimes, sometimes the advice is just go, throw something in the car and just go out there. And I would say, be careful about that and sort of know yourself a little bit, because sometimes that's a recipe for being miserable. It helps to do some research or
to go with someone,
to go with a friend. If you're getting into it for your first time, go with a friend who's experienced. Listen to a podcast. Do some reading. Learn a little bit. You don't want your car to break down and be stuck in the rain and be wet and miserable and say at the end, "Oof, I'm never doing that again." Right? A little knowledge goes a long way, I think.
Yeah, that's good advice. So how can people learn more about you and what you guys are doing?
So we are, we're on Instagram after all that. We're at Venturesome Overland. And we keep a blog, venturesomeoverland.com. You can find us there. We try to post once a week. So We try to keep the content up to date. And recently, Steve has a lot of good content up there about overlanding in Africa, doing the border crossings, doing the money changing, what our routes were. So there's a lot of great information on venturesomeoverland.com.
Yeah, you did a really good job on your website. I was reading through that last night. So nice job. We'll put those links in the show notes so it makes it easy for people to get to.
Thank you.
Yeah. So any more information you'd like to give or useful resources that our listeners should check out?
The only thing I would say is that we're super chill. So if people have questions about wanting to overland in Africa, Steve is really active on the Overlanding Africa Facebook page. Anybody can contact us through the blog or DM us on Instagram or Facebook. Venturesome Overland on Facebook. We are happy to talk about anything. And I had said early on that sometimes the paperwork, like if people specifically want to travel in Botswana, you need permits for the national parks and stuff. Like we can help arrange all that kind of stuff for people. So I would just say, don't hesitate to get in contact. We'd love to chat.
Yeah. We've learned a lot about some of the bureaucracy and some of the ins and outs of moving around this continent. And we just want to share it with other people. So yeah, we're really happy to talk to other folks.
Botswana is amazing. Like I seriously would encourage anybody to come here. And I know a lot of people go to like the big East African parks, but this country is incredible to drive through. So
I can't wait to go.
Yeah.
You're more than welcome anytime.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. We are humbled that you've given us such an amazing look into your world, experiences, and knowledge. Safe travels and adventures to the both of you. We hope to catch up with you again in the future.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
In Setswana, we say, Samaya Sentle, travel well.
So when you pull up into a remote village, what should you do when children are coming up to your car or even surrounding it?
Yeah, that was a really good topic. And we didn't really get into the details that like I wanted to. And after we talked with Steve and Julie, it just kept bugging me. So I circled back around and I asked them for more thoughts on the proper way to handle this. Like, you don't want to just be throwing candy and money at these kids. That's just so wrong. Not to mention setting the wrong example for the next overlander that rolls in town. So they said they just tell the kids, nope, sorry, and move on. Julie mentioned it can be very overwhelming to have kids surrounding your car, even sticking their hands and heads into your windows. As I can imagine, that would be pretty overwhelming, not something we're used to. But never throw anything from your car. Consider buying something from them if you want to help. If they have like a roadside stand and they're selling something and you legitimately need that item or wish to support them. They also said you'll often see signs set up in these towns and villages asking explicitly that you don't give to the street kids. So apparently there's good reason for this, with not wanting tourism to disrupt the local programs already set up to help people. And Julie said you can feel like the worst person in the entire world not giving to a kid who is begging. However, on the other hand, begging is bad for communities and isn't necessarily that helpful for the kids either. This is part of why they try to support local women in local economies. Think of it as taking a systematic approach rather than a personal approach.
So it would be super sad to see kids like looking up at you. Their big eyes, little tiny hands, smiling. Very hard to say no to that.
Yeah, and they've already been conditioned by all the other people that have rolled through doing the wrong thing. So do the right thing. I think Julie and Steve gave some great advice, and follow that. And leave a better community behind you when you leave, doing it the right way. Oh, she also had, there was one really good point in there with the guy giving out pencils and screwing up the economy.
Well, yeah, there's a guy locally right in the village that sold school supplies.
Yeah, so check with the chief, check with whoever's in charge of the town or village, and say, hey, this is what I'd like to do. Will that work for your town or village? Don't screw things up.
Yeah, we're visiting them. It's their home.
Yeah. Very good. What else was super great about that one? There was a ton, to be honest. I thought the financing piece was just absolutely spectacular. And then as we go through the year, I'm sure we'll get better at asking some of those questions and getting into some more detail. But what a great start to our new format for 2019. Oh, Steve gave us a new idea for a new name for the podcast.
A GNT podcast.
That was pretty funny. Thanks, Steve. We're taking that into very serious consideration.
So if you don't know what we're talking about, it's Gin and Tonic podcast.
Yeah, well, maybe we should just do that too. I'm sure there's somebody covering gin somewhere.
Okay, guys, Julie has given you some great advice. So if you're at home in the evening watching YouTube channels about overlanding and you're thinking that your significant other, you wish they would do this with you. So adding to Julie's recommendations, get up, vacuum, and do some dishes and ask your significant other, super nice, ask them if they're interested. A lot of times they will be.
Yep. Ask it in the right way. You got to speak their language. So there you go. Our first full interview with the 2019 format. Be sure to let us know what you think. And Steve and Julie, thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories, your experience, and your insights. It was truly an honor, and it was a lot of fun learning from both of you.
It's a good idea to visit the show notes page on our website at ghtoverland.com/podcasts. Select the Venturesome Overland episode. All the details and helpful links are already there for you.
And send your questions, suggestions, and feedback to ghtoverlandpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love it if you'd connect with us on social media at ghtoverland. Be sure to share this episode with your friends who enjoy travel off the beaten path. Overland travel is all about meeting new friends, seeing the most amazing places on earth, and of course, new food and new drinks. Hopefully G&T's in a can.
G&T. Before you race off, it would mean the world to us if you'd rate and review the podcast. Give GHT Overland a little iTunes love so we can reach as many overlanders as possible. Thank you, and we will see you next Thursday for a brand new episode of the GHT Overland podcast. Bye.
We'll see you in Greece.